George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right, and here I am, moving forward right through the middle with you. We'll be talking about the British elections, or actually English elections, though the significance for the British general election of what happened on Thursday cannot be understated. And is there a ceasefire or is there not? Is Rafah going to be invaded or is it not? Is Hamas and the other Palestinian resistance factions defeated, or were they able to land mortars and high precision weapons on an Israeli military post in Gaza just this afternoon, killing 4 Israeli soldiers and wounding badly more than a dozen others? And what's going to happen in the Ukraine? We'll be talking about these and many other subjects, no doubt, over the course of the next 2 hours. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night because this is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
On one level, it's a measure of how irrelevant the uni-party politics in Britain are that the Conservative government had such a bad night on Thursday that the Prime Minister might be overthrown in the coming week. And yet they came within just 1,500 votes of actually being able to declare they'd had a relatively good night. And though the mass media, which is head over heels for the wooden man, Keir Starmer, was more than ready to convince everyone that Labour had had a great night, in fact, the third parties and independents obtained far more gains in the election, far more gains in the election than the official opposition were able to do. Labour has a problem. It has 2 problems that overlap but are not entirely coterminous. Labour has a Gaza problem. How could it not? For millions of people in Britain, Muslim and non-Muslim, but all Muslims, all except the quislings that profess to be Muslims, but are still in Keir Starmer's genocide Labour Party, and I take this opportunity to ask all of those to judge themselves before they are judged. The time is running out where they can, in any sense, survive politically, or in other ways too, and remain inside Keir Starmer's Israel Labour Party. It's really not rocket science. You don't have to be Professor Einstein to work out that you are cooked, you are doomed. Your goose is on the plate at the next time you stand up for an election in Britain if you are a Muslim Labour candidate. But it's not only the Muslims, you see. If you look at any of the demonstrations, protests, petitions, manifestations of public distress at the slaughter in Gaza over the last 7 months, you will find the great majority of the people on these protests, in these petitions, making these boycott decisions, are not Muslims at all. So if there's 2.5 million Muslim voters in Britain, there's at least another 2.5 million non-Muslims for whom Gaza is a red line. and voting for genocide parties is not something that they are prepared to do. That makes 5 million. Keir Starmer has to get 13 million people to vote for him if Mrs. Starmer can truly start measuring the curtains in number 10. And I'm here to tell you and her that she should not do that, because the result of the next general election is very far from predetermined. It's very far from that endlessly predicted in rigged public opinion polls over the last couple of years, which show the Labour Party sometimes on 50% of the popular vote. But actually, on the grass where elections are fought, their true position is some 34%. And you don't win elections in Britain on less than 40% of the national vote. That's leaving aside all the local considerations, to which I shall turn in a few minutes, that will complicate that outcome even further. So if there are 5 million people who are in anguish, distress, in grief over the endless slaughter they've watched on their telephones, if not their televisions. I don't watch television, so I've only got second-hand information that virtually nothing I'm watching on my telephone ever appears on television. But as fewer and fewer people watch television news, and more people are watching what's happening on their telephones, it's a safe surmise for me that these 5 million distressed people are not going to be queuing up to vote for a party that has facilitated and enabled that genocide from the very first day. From the day that Keir Starmer said Israel had the right to cut off water, electricity, food, medicine, all supplies in a total, absolute medieval siege, since the leader of the Labour Party said that. And what else could he say? Because he had already pledged his troth to Israel years before. Without qualification, he said, I am a Zionist. Without qualification, I will always support Israel. That's what he said long before October the 7th, long before everything that's happened since October the 7th. So what else could he do for entirely internal party political reasons? Starmer pretends to be a rabid supporter of an Israeli government which is scarcely with parallel anywhere in the world, has no peer in its evil, wicked, venality, bloodthirsty, warmongering, up to its neck in the blood of women and children. But Keir Starmer is without qualification on its side, without equivocation on its side. He was already steeped in blood so far that he could not possibly make a decision as to whether it was bloodier to go on or bloodier to go o'er. And he chose to go on until tens of thousands became scores of thousands, became over 100,000, mainly women and children, I repeat, who were either murdered or maimed, injured, wounded, lethally wounded, in a territory which is a cage in which there is not a single functioning hospital in which they could be treated. So this Gaza problem is not going to go away, whether there is a ceasefire or not, whether Netanyahu falls or not, because none of that 5 million people is ever going to forget. Not only that Starmer put this albatross willingly around his own neck, but all of the other leaders of the Labour Party, from the Pat McFaddens to the David Lammys, to all of the top leadership of the Labour Party, over and over again went on the television opposing a ceasefire. Even a ceasefire, never mind justice. A ceasefire is not the right solution, they said. Israel has the right to do what it's doing. Starmer now tries to say he misspoke when he gave Israel that green light, but he did not. Emily Thornberry was on television days later defending every word that Keir Starmer said. David Lammy was saying it. David Lammy said it at the dispatch box on Wednesday in front of my eyes, 10 yards away from me, blaming the Palestinians for the fact that there was no ceasefire. That will never be forgotten. Maybe at the edges, maybe it will be deprioritized by 1,000, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 people. But for millions, it will never, ever be forgotten. And any Labour candidate dripping in blood, expecting votes from these people, is going to be sorely disappointed. So Labour has a Gaza problem which will not go away. But it also has a Starmer problem. I identified Starmer on this show right on the first day that this man is so wooden, I have seen birds attempting to nest in him. This man is clunky, infelicitous. He's absolutely incapable of speaking in a way that would in any way excite or move anybody. Nobody moves for Starmer out of love, only out of interest, only if they're one of the 20 or so broadcast journalists who are hoping to be inside number 10 as the next Alistair Campbell. They're competing for that job. None of them are moving because they're inspired by Keir Starmer. He has the charisma of a dead fish. In fact, he reminds me constantly of a fishmonger slab. His mouth open, but nothing coming out. This Starmer is incapable of even facing couch potato breakfast BBC television commentators, auto cue dollies, and the women are no better. Bowling softballs at him, he can't even do it. He's the worst performing leader of an opposition that anybody has ever seen that is involved or interested in British political history. And the election campaign hasn't even started yet. He's not even had to face a debate on television yet. He's never had to be questioned rigorously as the law requires. In electoral law, you're not allowed to bowl softballs at one guy and hard balls at the other. You'll be breaking the law if you do that. Starmer will be lucky to survive at all and will definitely not survive unscathed the rigors of a British general election campaign, not least because he'll have me on his heels at the head of a list of many hundreds, perhaps 500 candidates up and down the land, and I'll be demanding that I'm in the leaders' debates. We are already demanding that we are on the opinion polls. After all, Richard Weiss, the head of the Conform Party, he's in every opinion poll. He's never off the television. And we've got 4 times the number of elected council representatives that he does, and 100% more elected members of parliament that he does. On 1/100th of his budget and 1,000th of his television exposure. So we'll be there. We'll be chasing Keir Starmer. And when he's faced, as he was by me in Rochdale, as he was by one of our guests this evening, Akhmed Yakoob, the world-famous barrister, who in a campaign less than 5 weeks gained 70,000 votes and almost made Keir Starmer lose the West Midlands mayoralty, which in other circumstances with any other leader would have fallen into Labour's lap without anyone expressing an ounce of anxiety about the outcome. And Akhmed Yakoob's 70,000 votes came from the young people across a band of 7, 8, 10, maybe more parliamentary constituencies where we will be standing with his support and he with ours. In the Birmingham Ladywood constituency, we're going to wipe Labour in the West Midlands in the parliamentary election. So, Sir Keir, you can score off your list all those West Midlands Labour MPs that you thought were going to be a part of the majority you were already enjoying before the chickens had hatched. We'll be talking, of course, about the British general election throughout the show, about the local elections on Thursday. Other than my own electoral victories, no election result has ever given me more happiness than the one that Shahbaz Sarwar won in Manchester. Why? Not just because I'm very close to this family, not just because Longsight, the ward in question, is very dear to me. It's where I go in Manchester, the real capital city of England, the cock of the north. It's where I eat, it's where I shop, it's where most of my friends are. Not just because our candidate is a truly magnificent, unflappable, strong figure, the sort of fellow that if you had to go tiger shooting, you'd want him beside you with his gun. You'd know he wouldn't turn it on you. You'd know he wouldn't turn and run when the tiger came. But mainly because he defeated the deputy leader of the Manchester City Council himself. Labour moved heaven and earth through the kitchen sink at our campaign, even the toilet bowl, especially the toilet bowl. I wouldn't like to stoop to describing the kind of foul tactics that they employed, because this was a very big man we were fighting, a man that's been there for decades, a man that's central to the Labour dictatorship in the town hall in the great city of Manchester, and we beat him. In the most epic election ever fought in local government, ever, anywhere, we defeated the deputy leader of Manchester City Council. Now turning to, if you like, bigger things, though these things are big. The question of whether or not there is going to be a ceasefire before the invasion of Rafah is a moot point, because the invasion of Rafah has already begun. The endless day and night bombardment of a tent city has already slaughtered hundreds of people, most of them women and children. 1.6 million people living in tents on which Israel is dropping incendiary bombs to set the tents on fire. This has the potential to be the greatest war crime since the Second World War, and worse than many of the war crimes that we still shudder about today when we think of, watch, or read about the Second World War. This is a Holocaust. If you set fire to 1.6 million people, most of them women and children, what are you other than a Nazi? This has to be said. Israel is behaving not just like an occupying power. And we in Britain, you in America, you in France, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Italy, you've all been occupying powers. We have all committed terrible crimes as an occupying power. But nobody, at least not in the modern age, has systematically sought to physically annihilate millions of people who are already prisoners. Not since the gas chambers of Auschwitz, not since the Holocaust of the 1940s have we seen such an effort to wipe off the map millions of people solely because they are indigenous people to the land on which they are being slaughtered, and foreigners from Europe and North America have come to take their place. I told you it's going to be a bumpy night. Fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
I must start by congratulating you. It's great to be talking to George Galloway, MP, again.
Congratulations on your resounding victory. I think that I could speak on behalf of the world when I say we are thrilled to have you back in office.
Hi Bella, congratulations to your win. I would like to say that you were voted by the people, all the people that wanted you there. The other person, Starmer, Rishi Sunak, they weren't elected by the people. And I think you should broaden the horizon. I think I want to work for you in Birmingham and actually help your voice coming out of what's happening in Palestine.
Congratulations on such a huge victory. As I said on Twitter, it's a rare glint of hope in the midst of Gaza's dark night.
And I want to congratulate you on your momentous victory in Rochdale. You really put the fear of God into the political elite in this country, and that is something we can all be thankful for.
I want to congratulate you on your win. I think it's not just a win for you, George, but I think it's a win for Palestine in so many ways.
Thank you for everything that you're doing in the UK, because as a young communist in America, it's very inspiring to see your victory and everything that the Workers' Party of Great Britain is doing. I'm just so happy, and I will fully endorse George Galloway for Prime Minister and get rid of the Zionist in office who's currently occupying it.
You've been saying this for the longest time, and nobody seems to listen to you. I mean, those who don't seem to get what you've been standing for, when you said, yeah, this is about Palestine and the UK. Free Palestine means a free UK. They don't listen.
And Rochdale's are very lucky. I wish you should have a candidate in Coventry.
Thank you very much.
You know, you've given a lot of people a lot of hope and a big boost and an understanding that it is possible to beat the system, that no matter how powerful the political class may be, no matter how much they've got the mainstream media, in particular, under their thumb, the broadcast media, no matter how much they seek to control the narrative, given a chance, the people will reject them.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Whoa, American students, Alan Dershowitz is coming for your checks, notes. Boombox. He's going to bankrupt you. Take your boombox. Do they still have boomboxes in America? How quaint. We've got a poll running, as always. Does a vote for Israel at Eurovision endorse genocide? For the, I suppose, elucidation of our vast international audience, this is a reference to the Eurovision Song Contest, an obscure tradition at which most people laugh, but oddly, a significant number of people still watch, in which countries field candidates to sing a song almost always badly, almost always grotesque parodies. And countries vote quite politically, usually, for their preferred artist, and the artist becomes famous for not even 15 minutes. But Israel is in the Eurovision Song Contest, even though it has nothing to do with Europe, even though it's 2,500 miles away from where the Eurovision is centered. But they're allowed in, you see. Russia, which is a European country, is of course banned because, hey, it invaded somebody else's country. Get my drift? Does a vote for Israel at the Eurovision Song Contest endorse genocide? Answers yes or no. My goodness, 36,450 people have already voted, and I'm only now announcing it. You can vote on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter, my X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. And if you're watching on the YouTube stream, or indeed on Twitter, or any of the platforms that allow you to do so, please share with all your contacts, all your friends. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the United Kingdom and Ireland, 0808 196 5522, and the worldwide number is 44203 966 2625. Now, he won't thank me for putting it this way, but if there is a saint walking around in progressive politics anywhere today, it's Chris Hedges. A saintly, educated, calm, cool, and collected voice of experience on war and high politics, high crimes and misdemeanors. In a sane America, he'd be pretty near the president's desk at the White House. At least he'd be at Foggy Bottom as the Secretary of State. Instead, Chris Hedges has just been cancelled from yet another gig, yet another platform. But he'll never, ever be cancelled from the mother of all talk shows. Chris Hedges, welcome. Before we get on to the big stuff, the important, more important stuff like ceasefires, war, famine, pestilence and disease, what have they done to you now?
Well, the primary funder of The Real News is a guy named T.M. Scruggs, who told The Real News that if they did anything, in his eyes, to elect Donald Trump, they would lose their funding. That is just an inverted way of saying support Joe Biden and the Democrats. I have a long history with Scruggs. He had given money to Scheer Post, the website run by Bob Scheer. I had written a column defending the writer Alice Walker against charges that she was an anti-Semite. Scruggs demanded the column be removed. He was a major donor. And then when Bob Scheer refused to remove it, he cut off all contributions to the site. So the editor of The Real News, Max Alvarez, said that I was canceled because I jeopardized his nonprofit status. That is completely untrue. What happened was I interviewed Dennis Kucinich, former member of the House, former presidential candidate, anti-war candidate, who is running for a House seat as an independent in Ohio. I did not endorse him, which would have violated nonprofits. So I did not violate the rules. And what happened was that interview was removed from the site, and then my show was immediately terminated. That's the problem with wealthy, rich people or corporations running news sites. They distort, corrupt the truth, the news, whether that's on MSNBC, where every analyst discussing the police assaults on U.S. universities for non-violent protest, arresting students for trespassing on their own campuses, come from the police agencies or the security forces. So I got caught up in it. I'll have to, establish something now that is completely independent. As you said, I was pushed out of the New York Times for denouncing the war in Iraq when the wealthy publisher of Truthdig tried to fire the editor, Bob Scheer. I organized a strike among all the staff except for two of them, and then we were all fired. It's not a news story, but the walls are really closing in. There's just less and less possibility for legitimate criticism, legitimate dissent, and honest journalism.
Well, let us know what it is you decide to do next, and we will, of course, do our best to direct people your way. Let's turn to the proximate issue of a ceasefire in Gaza. You're a former head of the Middle East Bureau at the New York Times, as you say, before being fired for telling the truth, questioning the lies. What's your take? Is there a ceasefire coming or not?
It's always hard because, I'm not in Cairo covering the negotiations, but from a distance, I think it's clear that nothing is going to impede the Israeli assault on Rafah, ceasefire or no ceasefire. I think that if we look at all of the negotiations around the ceasefires, Israel has been the primary impediment to, despite what Anthony Blinken says about Hamas, that it's been Israel that's essentially stymied any effort to a ceasefire because they've sold out their own hostages. They have decided that those hostages are expendable to pursue their campaign of genocide. So if I had to take a guess, I would say if there is a ceasefire, it won't last long, because I think that Netanyahu and his government is very, very serious about going into Rafah, and all the signs are that is sooner rather than later.
There was a major operation by the Palestinian resistance in Gaza this afternoon. Seems to have been a remarkably accurate strike with many deaths and casualties amongst the Israeli occupation force. That would seem to suggest that the resistance is far from broken in Gaza. Is that your interpretation too?
Not just mine, but it's the interpretation of the American intelligence community, which estimates, according to press reports, that only a third of the resistance forces have been destroyed, and that the resistance forces, and in particular Hamas, have a capacity to continue fighting for a few more months, which I find surprising, because I'm sure that the Egyptian border, by which they once were able to get munitions and weapons smuggled in through tunnels, has been completely sealed off. So it looks like not only has the Netanyahu government completely failed in what are we pushing 7 months now of war to wipe out war. Shouldn't call it a war. 7 months of genocide to wipe out Hamas, but that they remain very resilient and are able, as you just point out, to carry out very significant attacks against the occupation forces. I think we have to remember that in a modern battlefield, people can be grievously wounded, wounds that in other wars would have seen them die, but they can be transported very quickly to hospitals inside Israel. But the stories are that although the death count is not terribly high for the Israelis, we have thousands and thousands of Israeli soldiers who are very grievously wounded, and Israel is doing all it can to essentially hide those numbers.
Now, even if Netanyahu wanted an end to the war, and plainly he does not, people like Ben Gvir and other right-wing, even more right-wing fanatic extremists are holding the Israeli government's feet to the fire, aren't they? For them, and Ben Gvir said literally in these words this afternoon, we are not interested in a hostage deal. We must invade Rafah now. That means that the policies of Western governments, many of which would describe themselves as liberals, social democrats, liberals in Western Europe, in North America, Trudeau, Biden, their policy is being driven by people who were literally on the terrorist lists just a couple of years ago, like Ben Gvir.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, and these are heirs of Meir Kahane, the extreme right-wing rabbi. But this shows the shift from liberal Zionism, which meted out severe repression of the Palestinians, just like religious Zionism. But it shows that shift. The language, it's more a shift of language. I think the intent was always there, but liberal Zionism provided a better veneer. The liberal Zionists ultimately banned Kahane's Koch party, but these people are all the heirs to Kahane, and perhaps they speak more truthfully than the liberal Zionists, because I don't think that replacing Bibi Netanyahu would make any difference for the Palestinians. I don't think replacing Bibi Netanyahu would halt an assault on Rafah. I think that there are arguments over whether Netanyahu should be prime minister, especially for the egregious security and intelligence lapses of October 7th, not to mention Netanyahu's documented corruption. But in terms of the genocidal campaign, we know from polls within Israel it has full-throated support from the vast majority of the Israeli population and the entirety of the Israeli ruling class.
You know, it's important. We always accuse the other side of living in a bubble, and they do, but it's important we don't live in a bubble either, isn't it? I looked back at a documentary around the killings of 4 students in America at the Kent State University in 1970, the height of the anti-Vietnam War campaign. And they did a lot of vox pops in the vicinity of the campus, the neighbors of the students, the parents of many of the students at that university, who invariably said to the camera that the troopers should have shot more of them. The troopers should have wiped out the protesters at Kent State. I mean, blood-curdling it was. What's the attitude, in your view, in Middle America to us, grotesque spectacle of soldiers, for that's what many of them were, with high-powered rifles and armor, beating the hell out of elderly professors and young kids sitting in at their own university over the last couple of weeks?
Well, we've got to look at how the media portrays it, and I'm including the quote-unquote liberal media, the New York Times, my former employer, MSNBC. So they've completely distorted the narrative. These groups are painted not as groups that attempt to protest the genocide, but as groups that are threatening Jews and Jewish students and calling for the destruction of Israel. When the police were green-lighted to go in, sometimes with guns drawn, on students at Columbia, the excuse was that these groups were being led by infiltrators and outside agitators. Joe Biden has called them hate groups. Chuck Schumer, senator from New York, head of the Democratic Senate Majority Leader, has called them terrorists, has said that they were terrorists. So, and the media has just amplified that caricature of the students. And that was also true, of course, during the war in Vietnam. So the propaganda engine is fierce. It is unrelenting in terms of demonizing. There's just one story, just as, you know, we get a constant replay of October 7th with all sorts of lies, beheaded babies and systematic rape, all of which is not true, to justify the genocide. We get an assault of lies on a daily basis that mischaracterize the students, what they're doing, what they stand for. I mean, I was just up at Columbia, and I've spent a lot of time with the Princeton encampment. I live in Princeton. About 40%, I'm estimating, of these protesters are Jewish. And in fact, the worst kinds of assaults, the fear, when we talk about fear on campus, is felt by non-Zionist Jews from their Zionist counterparts. Remember, a lot of these campuses like Columbia have current or former IDF soldiers as students, and we had students attacked with skunk spray violently by 3 former IDF soldiers on the steps of Low Library at Columbia in January. It is such a massive distortion of the truth that of course these people in Middle America who are unfortunately believe what they're told are whipped up into a kind of a hatred and a kind of support for this militarized occupation. I mean, we've had universities where snipers have been deployed on the roofs. We had when the NYPD went in to the second story window and for this machine, I don't know what it's called, but a ramp that went up to the window, they had their guns drawn. In fact, they fired a gun. They used smoke grenades. I mean, the students were beaten when several went to the hospital. One was beaten unconscious. It's just staggering. But you're right. And that comes from the complicity of the press in essentially not only justifying the genocide, but justifying armed assault against nonviolent protesters who are opposing the genocide.
You ever lose faith, Chris?
No, I come out of Calvin. I have a very dark view of human nature. I lose faith when people... So I've spent a lot of time actually writing a very long piece, probably have spent 12 hours interviewing student activists, including students at Princeton who have gone on a hunger strike. And you can't sit with them and lose faith. They're sacrificing their careers, their education. It's hard to get into these schools like Princeton and Columbia. Their parents are not happy. For undergraduates, I mean, they said, at least the graduate students still have a degree. If we're expelled, we don't even have a college degree. And when you spend time with them, you don't lose faith. They and the Yemenis are the 2 groups that have finally stood up in a meaningful way against severe repression and against a legitimate fear that their academic careers will be completely sabotaged.
Finally, there's no point in wasting words on Joe Biden. I think we're beyond that. But what did you make of Trump's unhinged speech yesterday, in which he appeared to threaten the deportation of Americans if they oppose Israel, and anyone who tries to destroy Israel, he said, will be destroyed by us. He seemed to be threatening, I don't know, kind of mass capital punishment in America for Israel's enemies. It's like a Dutch auction, isn't it? Where everyone competes to see who can be the most slavish, the most vile supporters of the worst acts since the Second World War.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, we do have to take Trump's rhetoric with a grain of salt. He can rhetorically go to places that, in fact, he doesn't ultimately go. I mean, the tragedy of this current presidential election is that we, as Americans, are offered a choice between a candidate who is actively pursuing genocide and a candidate who will probably snuff out what is left of our very anemic democracy. I don't consider that much of a moral choice. So, I mean, there's very little daylight, ultimately, between Trump and Biden. For a Palestinian, there's no daylight. There would be no difference whether Trump was in the White House or Biden. And internally, there's very little daylight, given the draconian use of force that has been carried out in campuses across this country. I mean, when I was up at Columbia the other day, that campus is on complete lockdown. It's completely surrounded, not only surrounded by police and private security, but occupied internally by New York City police. No student can go into that campus unless they live in a residence hall on the inside of campus. There are no classes. They can't go to labs. They can't go to the library. It's a Potemkin university. It doesn't really exist anymore. And I don't think that Trump, Biden, I don't think there'd be much difference in terms of the repression that has been meted out on these university campuses. I mean, the next step would be perhaps like Kent State, shooting protesters, shooting demonstrators. But we've walked all the way up to that line.
Chris Hedges, keep on keeping on. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Chris Hedges, political commentator, journalist, writer, and host of the Chris Hedges Report. Quick break, then it's your calls all the way to the hour. Stay tuned.
As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out, pallid green, and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire.
Well, you get that, plus my films, Killing Kelly and The Killings of Tony Blair, gratis if you support me on Patreon. Please do. I really do depend on it. Patreon.com/George Galloway if you want to strengthen our work. Please follow us there. Now, don't forget, if you've just joined the show, you can download the MOATS podcast from tomorrow morning to get a compressed bite-sized version straight to your phone or computer. This week we're in the top 5 in Saudi Arabia, Singapore and Cyprus, and we're number 1 in Tanzania. It's really popular actually across Africa in general. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code in the corner of your screen now. Let's go for the first call to North Carolina, where Melissa wants to talk about the New World Order, or as Elvis Costello called it, Melissa, the new world order. It smells just as bad as the old one. Go ahead, Melissa.
Well, you might be surprised. There's definitely a lot going on in America right now. As you can see, our leaders and officials and law enforcement are clearly under some type of control, beyond their control. And at the top of it is the darkness of Netanyahu in Israel and their regime of control.
Are you there, Melissa?
Hello?
Yeah, keep going. You were getting into your stride. Keep going.
Sorry about that. The phone is breaking up a little bit. Using the fact that the leaders in control right now were selected due to the fact that there are so many hidden secrets within their lives, things that are used against them to control them and to keep them in line. During Trump's presidency, many of the agencies were filled with a certain type of individual. And when Biden came into power, something I became aware of, the fact that many Trump appointees, many parts of Trump's cabinet and administration have remained in the Biden administration in different leadership positions. And if they were opposed to one another, this wouldn't be the reality. There's something much larger at play spiritually and, cosmically that is going on in the United States. You could say it's biblical.
Well, I don't know about the cosmic side of things, Melissa, but it's absolutely true that bluster aside, unconventionality aside, as Chris Hedges just put it, there's really not much daylight between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. The only thing you can hope for is that Trump will do things in office that are the opposite, maybe even wildly the opposite of the things he's saying in opposition. I'm hoping that Trump wins for one reason only, and there are 100 reasons why one could and should fear another Trump presidency. I'm hoping he wins for just one reason, because I think he'll end the Ukraine war in an instant, even before his swearing in. That's what he's promised to do, and I think he will do it. And he will expose the truth about the Biden crime family and the Ukrainian oligarchs that may change politics in America for good. So that's the one reason that I'm hoping Trump defeats Biden. And I'm terrified for 100 other reasons of that very same victory. Melissa, thank you very much for that. Now, tomorrow I think I'll be shooting my new show, which is called Have It Out with Galloway. It's unique in the sense that the audience are there on a video screen talking back. Take a quick look at this. I'm back, not just here in the scene of many crimes, but on your screen with a brand new weekly show called Have It Out with Galloway. There'll be a panel, there'll be experts, there'll be me, but there will also be you joining me as a studio audience online. Have a go. Why don't you, if you think you're hard enough? So if you want to be in that audience on the video wall, go to our website, haveitoutwithgalloway.com. You can register there. And I've probably spoken to many of you before, but I don't know what you look like. It would be great to see your face as well as hear your question. My old friend Declan in Dublin is up next. Go ahead, Declan.
Right, George. With this accent, I have to say two things. The first thing is today is the anniversary of the death of Bobby Sands, who was the MP for Fermanagh and South Tyrone, for whom I campaigned at the time. Now, Bobby Sands, as many of your listeners will know, has changed politics in Ireland. That's the first thing. The second thing is we don't play cricket down my way, or but one of your candidates is a certain Monte Panesar, whom I heard interviewed the other day, and they were trying to catch him out with the Schleswig-Holstein question and NATO and stuff like that, right? Now, the problem there, and this goes to the total first hour of your show, is they're playing one game, but what they're missing is there are conversations going on in the cricket fields of not of Eton, but of Southall and Eton and Birmingham and Manchester. If we go back to this bloke Monty, I see he's a Luton Town supporter who put up a great fight. And what's happening in those places is these people are coming back to their houses after playing cricket or coming home from school, and their parents are saying, well, how'd you get on in school today? Oh, we're learning girls are boys and boys are girls. Is that right? Yeah, very right. And in Birmingham in particular, they've been, a lot of the parents have been very upset about that. So these people weren't, if you like, political animals, say like you or even like me, but they're scratching their heads. They're saying, what's going on in Gaza? What's all this about boys and girls and all the rest of it? Now, after the Bobby Sands thing, or Eamon de Valera, when he won the 1917 by-election, MI5 said Ireland was lost. It's gone. It's finished. The game is up. And what I think is happening with you and with all these other people in Birmingham and Southall and everywhere else is that England is changing, and there's all these little conversations in cricket fields and football fields and school gates, and the the ruling class of Labour, Tories, the media. They haven't a clue what's going on. And just to get back to Monty and them having a laugh at the Schleswig-Holstein question, him not knowing it, I heard when you spoke in Parliament 2 weeks ago and you mentioned the 1953 coup in Iran, and they all thought that was a big giggle. And these people are voting on Iran, and they haven't heard of the 1953 coup, which shows their total ignorance of what they're voting on. And if Monty is elected to the British Parliament, and if there is a vote on anything like that, I'm sure he'll get a primer from you on it, and he'll have some kind of an idea.
He will. A great call, Declan. I thought Monty's answer was the right one. When asked about the Schleswig-Holstein question, he said, I leave that kind of thing to George. As well might he. But Monty and the candidate will be announcing in a day or two, or at least this coming week, an international rugby player, capped many times for his country. How's that for tantalising? A rugby player of great note and repute will be announced as our parliamentary candidate next week. Who knows, we might have a top footballer or former top footballer the week after that. We're giving them a drip, drip, drip. They are not masters necessarily of the Schleswig-Holstein question, but they're masters of things even more important than that. They are talking the same language as the people on the streets. And they're raising the same questions and the same discontent as is felt down there by the people on the streets. Great call, Declan. Jamie is in Malaga, wants to talk about our friend Julian Assange. Go ahead, Jamie.
Oh, good evening, George. Thanks so much for taking my call, and just massive respect for your win in Rochdale. And I'm so glad you're back in Parliament and just all the incredible things you're doing. Obviously, all the talk at the moment is about Gaza, and it's just appalling what's going on. And I just can't believe that we're supporting sending arms to Gaza after the ICJ ruling that there's a plausible case of genocide against Gaza. It's just appalling. But I've called obviously about Julian Assange, and I suppose these things are connected. It was really just to ask to if I could just plug or do a call out for May the 20th, Monday week, is the hearing where the judges will decide whether to accept the US assurances. If they do, then Julian potentially will be on a plane with a black sack over his head and sent off to America, and we'll probably never hear of him again. So it's a really, really important day next Monday, a week tomorrow, May the 20th, to try and get people's supporters for Julian to come to the Royal Courts of Justice in central London and do all they can to show support. That was one. And the other one, there's a film as well, which is being shown. It's a film about, a documentary about Julian Assange called The Trust Fall, which I actually saw. It was premiered in Hackney, but it's being shown at 88 Odeon cinemas in the UK this Wednesday. So just to sort of encourage people to get in contact with their Odeon cinema and check if it's showing in their local one. But it's, as I say, 88 cinemas across the UK. This is on Wednesday, the 8th of May. George, that's the...
What's the film called, Jamie?
It's called The Trust Fall.
Okay, look forward to that, and we'll definitely promote that. Is it only on for one night?
It's actually only on for one night. It is at 88 different cinemas. If people go to Twitter or to X and put in The Trust Fall, there's a list of all the different cinemas that it's showing at, but it is showing at the Odeon cinemas. And it's very good. It shows you, the whole story and the disgraceful persecution of Julian, who, as we all know, has just completed 5 years in effective solitary confinement in a UK prison. It's an utter disgrace that this is happening, and of course a major threat to a free press and our rights to know. And so, George, thank you so much for all your support towards Julian and all the great work you're doing.
Thank you, Jamie, for giving us that tip. 88 cinemas across Britain on Wednesday. The Trust Falls, in a film about Julian Assange. One night only. Do try and get there. It'll be on your local Odeon, Odeon, which stands for Oscar Deutsch Entertains Our Nation. Who was Oscar Deutsch? Wouldn't you like to know? I know all about him and his brother, but if I told you any more, I'd have to kill you. One more call before the break. It's Robert in the Bronx. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Robert.
Hey, George. Thank you for having me on taking my call. Richard, your next guest, had a professor on his show 2 weeks ago who was so very knowledgeable about what's going on in the Middle East. Also, can a non-citizen make a donation to the Workers' Party?
No, we can't take donations from out of the UK. To get a political donation in this country, you have to be on the electoral register here in this country. Why not support the show instead, Robert? You can most efficiently do that through the patreon.com/George Galloway. But you've teed up very nicely my next guest, who is the aforementioned Richard Medhurst. Quick break, and then Richard is with us. Eyes there. There's no break. There's no break for me, Richard. Why should there be? We're in desperate times. Tell us, Richard, please, first, is there going to be a ceasefire or not? And if there is, how likely is it with this gang in Tel Aviv that it will last longer than it takes to exchange such prisoners as Israel hasn't managed to kill yet?
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on. The Israelis have no interest in a ceasefire. This is just a show, an act that the Israelis and Americans are putting on to calm down people who are sane and who are angry about this genocide. You know, there's something that we have to understand, is that the hostages, the Palestinian hostages, they've been sitting in Israeli dungeons for many years, and the Israelis, they pretend like they want to have an exchange, but they just keep on refusing the offer that was there on the table since day one. Since day one, it's been the same offer. Get out of Gaza, allow people to go back to their homes, and give us everyone that you've put in dungeons. Remember, these are women, these are children, these are men who are locked up without charge, without trial. And I should remind people who are listening that these are British laws that are used to lock them up. I don't mean copies, I mean actual British laws, colonial laws from the emergency defense regulations. The Israelis apply them on our behalf. How nice. And so there's no ceasefire in sight, and they're playing cat and mouse with Hamas. You know, this is something we really have to be clear on this. Ben-Gvir is not interested in a ceasefire. He just wants to kill everyone. Netanyahu is not interested in a ceasefire because he wants to keep his job. The second that there's a ceasefire, it's bye-bye for him. He's going to be, all the blame will be dumped on him, and Israelis will try to salvage what they can of their supposed reputation, if there is one in the first place. And so they say, it's all Netanyahu. We didn't do anything. There's no racism in Israeli society. We don't commit genocide and kill people like this, as if we don't know about 1948. And then they'll say, it's Netanyahu. Okay, we'll get rid of Netanyahu. Now take us back. So no, there's no ceasefire in sight.
Now, not content with murdering well over 100 Palestinian journalists and other national journalists in the course of the last 7 months, they have, being a democracy and all, just closed down AlJazeera television, which was the only outlet that was showing people exactly what was happening in Gaza. Is this because Israelis were watching it and might have been influenced by it, or is it just vindictive rage?
It's more than vindictive rage, George. We have to dispel this myth that Israel is a democracy in any capacity. I just mentioned those British laws from the emergency defense regulations. Guess what? The Israelis have a military censor, which comes from those British laws, meaning they can gag the press. And this is done regularly. So if you're an Israeli journalist, never mind Al Jazeera, you can be sent to prison because you published something that the military don't want you to publish. Okay, so let's be clear about that. The military control the press. Moreover, we've seen the Israelis attack El Mayadeen and threaten to shut them down as well, and harassing their reporters on the streets. They've done the same thing now to Al Jazeera, where they've shut Al Jazeera down, and they've made it illegal to stream or broadcast any part of their service, because we have to remember they are, as you pointed out, the only ones on the ground who have actually captured a lot of the footage in Gaza. But again, a lot of credit also has to go to El Mayadeen. They've both been good, but in English, it's definitely Al Jazeera. And that's a danger to them, because the Israelis, while they're committing genocide, they worry about their reputation. That's why they censor people, they fire people, they harass people. And so now we have Al Jazeera being officially banned. But they've bombed Al Jazeera journalists and their families before. We shouldn't forget that just a few months ago, actually twice this happened in this war. Twice they attacked the family of Walid Dahdour, so who works at Al Jazeera, and they killed his son, grandson, daughter. So that's what Israel does to journalists. They murder them, and now the count is above 140. And yeah, very democratic, as you can see, George.
Will this mean that Al Jazeera will have to move their outfit out of Gaza, which is illegally occupied territory still, and therefore Israel presumably has the same legal right over that it does over the territory as a whole. Will Al Jazeera now do a runner, or will they continue to bring us the very brave and brilliant coverage in English that they have been doing?
Yeah, so George, the Israelis, they use the Geneva Convention as the legal basis for their occupation. But the Geneva Convention says clearly you can't use this to annex territories and just stay there for decades, which is what the Israelis have done. So therefore, anything the Israelis do in the West Bank or Gaza is by definition illegal because they have abused the Geneva Convention. Moreover, these laws that they have about banning Al-Mayadeen and banning Al Jazeera, they're not allowed to go and impose them on other people's territory. It's completely forbidden in any capacity, with or without the Geneva Convention. And so they will just come and say that, well, these are terrorists. They are giving air or oxygen to Hamas, and so therefore they're legitimate targets. This is their reasoning, right? Inside quote unquote Israel and outside. And so they're very shameless about it. They're very shameless when they speak in Hebrew about how they just want to murder the journalists. And they will just use this as a legal basis inside of the colony called Israel to go and hunt down the crews, the camera crews, the journalists. And I don't think they will leave. I don't think that they're going to do a run. I do think that they will stay in Gaza and they will continue their coverage. And we should salute them for that because they're really risking their lives and their families' lives to do it.
Now, of course, you mentioned Al-Mayadeen, a camera crew and reporter of theirs, were actually murdered by the Israel occupation force in Lebanon earlier in this latest round of the conflict. And there was another atrocity this day, wasn't there, in Lebanon? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so they have bombed camera crews and journalists that are not even in Gaza, right? I think this is something we should make very clear. I mean, even if you are in Gaza, that's not a reason to be killed because you're a journalist in Gaza. But just to show how vindictive the Israelis are, they are firing into Lebanon. So this is South Lebanon, but the north for the Israelis. They're firing into South Lebanon at groups of journalists where there is no battlefield, there's no combat, it's not even an urban area. These are wide open fields, and they just fire at them with tanks, and they kill them. And it also extends to the bigger Western ones, like for example, Reuters. They had one journalist, Issam Abdullah, who was killed in the start of the war. And what's disgusting is that Reuters, they act like they don't know what happened. And we saw the same thing in Iraq. You have the Spanish journalists or other journalists in the WikiLeaks collateral murder video who are gunned down. And then the top brass in Reuters, they pretend like it's not clear what happened, as if, there's another army besides the Americans or the Israelis there. They know very well what happened. And what I've said before, and I will continue to repeat this, is that I don't think local journalists, Arab journalists, should risk their lives, literally risk their lives, to do coverage for news agencies that will discard them and drop them like a hot potato the minute that they're murdered and not even bother to defend them. I think it's very, very vicious to just let these people fend for themselves. And then, once they're literally murdered, your staff, your colleagues are murdered, you just don't do anything.
So if there's no ceasefire, Richard, it's going to be a long, hot and bloody summer across the region, isn't it?
Yes, and something else that we should point out besides killing journalists, there are doctors that are being killed left and right. And when I say killed, I mean targeted. Okay, so this is it's premeditated. It's a policy of actively targeting doctors. I was trying to come up with a term for it in Greek, because iatro is doctor, and then you can have iatrocide. The problem is that iatrocide already has a meaning. It means that someone dies at the hands of a doctor. So that's not the meaning that I want to repurpose the word for. I think we need to repurpose and change the meaning of the word to describe what Israel is doing, which is murdering healers, the best and the brightest healers, surgeons, nurses, first responders in Gaza. And we have, for example, Dr. El-Bursh, who was killed just a few days ago, he was tortured to death, and they kidnapped him in January. So they basically tortured him for 4 or 5 months until he finally died. And this is a man who was trained at King's College, London. So, you know, he is an excellent surgeon whose life has been taken in the most vicious circumstances. And, you know, the universities will likely say nothing. The education ministers and all the people in academia will likely say nothing. And I find this so repugnant and vicious that your colleague or someone in your field is tortured to death. And we just, you know, we allow this to happen, and we actually arm and abet this. And another thing is that his colleague, Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, was denied entry into Germany and then denied entry into France with the same ban. So the Germans slapped him with a 1-year ban on the Schengen area. And this shows you how scared the Israelis are. They're so afraid of a doctor, just a surgeon, going to the French Senate and testifying, telling the world what he saw in Gaza and what Israel is doing. That is such it really embodies and encapsulates how much wrong the Israelis are doing, how vicious and evil their behavior is, and how desperate they are to attack anyone and everyone. Journalists, doctors, UN staff, it doesn't matter. They will murder anyone who gets in their way.
I hope to see you on the campaign trail in the UK soon, Richard. Announcement impending. I hope to see you sitting next to me in the House of Commons in the new Parliament. Thanks for joining us. As always, the effervescent Richard Medhurst, courageous and eloquent. Just like the chap who's coming up after this short break, Akhmed Yakoob, future parliamentary candidate for Birmingham Ladywood. He's a defence and human rights lawyer, and he just caused absolute panic in the ranks of the Labour Party over the last 5 weeks in the mayoralty for the West Midlands. Stay tuned for Akhmed. I'll be leading scores of parliamentary candidates and potentially hundreds. And of course, if they were all to be elected, I might have enough support to become the Prime Minister. But unfortunately in this country, we don't elect the Prime Minister directly. If we did, we might be better off. We've got a Prime Minister for whom nobody at all voted at any level anywhere. He was not even elected by his own members of Parliament. But our Prime Minister is appointed by the King, if he's still there, on the basis that they can command the loyalty, the majority loyalty on the floor of the House, which would be of the order of 325, 326 MPs. It's exceedingly unlikely that that will ever be me. What I'm concentrating on trying to achieve is that it is not clear who has got the majority of seats, who will be able to form a government. In other words, I'm trying to bring about a hung parliament in which people like me, like you, will have some negotiating room, will have some trading room to give our vote for PM to the person who acknowledges and accepts and is ready to implement some of the key demands that we have, the foremost of which is peace, an end to Britain's role as a perpetual warmonger, as the tail of the American war dog. But there are many other demands that we have also. I am running to be Prime Minister in the sense that I will be leading a long, long list of Workers' Party parliamentary candidates. And if they were all to be elected, well, then we'd be flying.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Blimey, the poll's going well. 39,590 people have voted. And you've still got at least 20 minutes, maybe 25, to get your vote in on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. It is quite heavily in favour of the yes vote. That a vote for Israel at the Eurovision Song Contest would be the endorsement of genocide, though on a couple of the platforms, less notably so. So have your say, get your vote in on those platforms. I'm apologising to those that are phoning, trying to get on the show. You're very unlikely now to get on it because not only have we got a third guest, but we've got hundreds of people who've already phoned, and I think we're probably full. Now, talking of calls, just 5 weeks ago, a little over, Akhmed Yakoob would have been a call Saul figure, just call Saul, and plenty of people just called Akhmed. He's possibly the most successful lawyer in the whole country. And he puts that to good use. He does a lot of charity work, a lot of pro bono work, but he has a massively successful legal practice. But he just couldn't take it anymore. Looking at Gaza and looking at the politicians conspiring with each other to collaborate with the massacre in Gaza. So he threw his hat in the ring, and the rest is history. He is the one and only 70,000 vote man, Akhmed Yakoob. Yesterday he was a mayoral candidate. Ahmed, from today, you're a parliamentary candidate. We've got to get you on the road in Birmingham, Ladywood. But before we turn to that, tell us how the experience was for you.
It was amazing. One of the best experiences of my life. And the best part of it was when I seen the Labour Party stress over the last couple of days because they thought they had lost the election. And they kept saying it was me that made them lose the election. A senior official even inferred that my voters and my supporters are Hamas sympathizers. They were losing it, and one Labour councillor tweeted, the mayor of West Midlands will call Hamas in the morning when elected. They were losing it, so that was the best part of it.
Yeah, I mean, they had every right to melt down, of course, because you got almost 70,000 votes from people that in normal times would have been more than likely voting for them, and they would have won in a landslide. But you taught them that you can't take people's votes for granted, didn't you?
Yeah, that was the aim, and I've more than achieved that. They were sweating to the last minute, and I took votes from the inner city areas where they think that they are secure and they will never lose. I took a lot of votes from them. And my own constituency, Ladywood, I took well over 15,000 votes from Ladywood.
Well, we'll have to turn to that in a minute, and you and I spoke about this earlier today. But before we do that, what do you think the impact is on other Muslim MPs and councillors in the West Midlands area? They must have seen the writing on the wall now, mustn't they? I mean, whenever they come up for election, we're going to do this all over again. We're going to wipe them off the political map.
That's exactly what I was thinking. So whenever there's a council by-election, there will be candidates. Whenever there's an MP election, there are going to be candidates. So yeah, now is the beginning of the end for them. And I said it openly to a lot of MPs and councillors during the count. I said, come and join us.
Exactly. Judge yourself before you are judged. The writing's on the wall. What more do you need to persuade you that now is the time to ditch Keir Starmer?
He needs to be ditched, but some councillors should be ashamed of themselves when they say they are pro-Palestine and then they are quick to go and shake hands with Keir Starmer when he turns up in Birmingham. They should be ashamed of themselves.
They should. Now, and I know, and I can tell from your voice that a bit like me, although more than me, because you did more shouting over the last 5 weeks than I did, but I did quite a bit on your behalf too.
You did. Thank you
tiring.
very much for coming.
I can sense that you're a little bit tired, but really the general election might be very soon. Can we say right now that Akhmed Yakoob will be a parliamentary candidate for Birmingham Ladywood whenever the general election comes?
Yes, definitely. I will be the candidate for Ladywood. It's mine to lose.
Well, she should be on notice now that you don't enter into these things half-heartedly. You're going to make a really serious effort to be a member of Parliament sitting next to me, aren't you?
100%. That's my dream, sitting next to George Galloway in Parliament. That would be my childhood dream come true. So I'm going to work day and night in Ladywood. And most of, like I said earlier, I think on the sample counting, we counted about 15,000 votes from those polling stations within Ladywood alone. So they are going to
keep
have
the band together, keep the campaign team together. Let you and I meet. Maybe come down to Parliament in the week, Ahmed. The Labour people will be delighted to see you and me walking through the corridors of power. It's always nice to see their faces elongate and the tears appear in their eyes. Let's get together soon, yeah?
You let me know, I'll come down.
God bless you. See you. Bring one of your nice cars and we'll go for a run.
I will, don't worry. I'll bring the 911.
God bless you, Ahmed, and brilliantly done.
God bless you.
Massive congratulations to you on that achievement, which dominated actually the entire campaign in the West Midlands, in the second city of the empire, Birmingham in particular. Let's go straight to calls. Mo is in Birmingham. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Mo.
George, what a pleasure to talk to you, sir.
Thank you.
And what a lineup. I mean, Ahmed, what a brilliant candidate. And I'm so happy to...
He's a really charismatic guy, you know.
Yeah, I can see that. And what a pleasure, because I live in Ladywood. He's going to be my candidate. I guarantee it. My vote is with the man already. I wasn't aware until now that he's going to stand for Ladywood, but yeah, definitely he got my votes, and I'm pretty sure thousands of other votes as well in this area. And Richard, what a brilliant guy.
I think he's unstoppable. He's got a team of hundreds because he's a very successful man. He's got the financial resources to make a campaign. He is massively popular amongst the youth. He's a superstar amongst the youth in Birmingham, in the West Midlands. Walsall, for example, he got a huge vote in Walsall. I'd say the Labour MP there now should be polishing her resume because she's going to be looking for a new job.
Yeah, George. I mean, yeah, well put. Well, what I think, George, is if I can say, and I hopefully change your mind on one point, is the election of Donald Trump. If we remember, Donald Trump moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So I think you are right that he will stop the Ukraine war, but he will give Netanyahu a blank check to do whatever he wants. And it's gone from, it's ethnic cleansing and genocide because they want to clear out the whole Gaza Strip and of course the West Bank. And I think that although, I can see your point on Ukraine, I don't think that Trump would be a good candidate for any measure, And also I think that
Mo,
we need...
I've never said he'd be a good candidate. All I said was between the evil of Joe Biden, which is an actual reality right now, killing people right now, not just in Gaza, but in the Ukraine, in the Yemen, and other places too. That's the actual reality right now. And the rhetorical reality of Donald Trump's blank check, there's not much daylight. I conceded that already. But if the Ukraine balloon goes up, there'll be no Palestine. There'll be no mother of all talk shows. There'll be no me, and there'll be no you. If the world descends into the nuclear inferno on the place that it's most likely to happen, namely on the Ukrainian front line, France has already got soldiers fighting Russia in Ukraine, foreign legionnaires, foreign fools who for francs are risking their lives for little Macron and likely lose their lives to the Russian forces in Ukraine. Germany may also. Imagine the last time the Germans were fighting in Ukraine. These people have clearly forgotten how that all ended. But you're absolutely right, Mo. It's a battle between two total monsters when it comes to the Israel-Palestine question. Let's go to New York. Ellie in New York wants to talk about the UK elections. I told you it was the international global university of the airwaves, didn't I? Ellie, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Galloway. I'm calling because given the state of elections in the UK and around the world, especially here in the US, I have spent a bit of time in Italy, and the history of the country, especially since the Second World War, is very much the script that is being played over and over. Except unfortunately American citizens are not very much aware of it. We can start in 1984 with a parliamentary commission led by Tina Anselmi, which reported on what you have talked about before, the deep state. Ms. Anselmi called it Stato Parallelo, the parallel state, which indeed existed, and they conducted a thorough investigation, which was met with denial, delegitimization, and so on and so forth. Anyway, in 1992-93, they had another big investigation in Italy, which was called Mani Puliti, which was a bribe scandal between political parties and all the industrial business leading people. And again, that process was portrayed as a job conducted by the opposition. And from that moment on, the judiciary was labeled as being politicized. Then all of that led to the arrival of Berlusconi, and we know Mr. Berlusconi and his Bunga Bunga parties, which were such a shame for Italy and for everyone in politics, I think. So anyway, a lot of these, some of these Italian analysts, the political analysts, have concluded that anytime there's an effort to redistribute wealth, to implement the Constitution as is written, that effort is met with bombs or new laws to decriminalize crimes and more wars.
I think that Mr. Pellet was very clear in his synthesis of what is happening in the U.S. In his last presentation in your show, he said how widespread Zionism is in our society, and we see it. Unfortunately, I might disagree with you that Trump is not really any kind of solution. I think he will do what Milei is doing in Argentina, because Argentina is what's to come. They are trying there very hard. They try to concentrate the power with these new laws in one man who is a vulnerable character, and the same actors are in play. One just has to go and see where Milei has come and gone since he's president, and what type of reforms he's made, and who is in association with him. So all that said, we are really between a hard place and hell. I don't know how we're going to get out of this, but in Italy, when they tried to clean up the scene, the extreme right, or well, the far right, led by Berlusconi, came to power, and I'm thinking it's the same replay here. It's really hard to watch. I don't know what.
Well, I'll tell you what. Even the Calvinist Chris Hedges, Dr. Chris Hedges, would find it difficult to be too optimistic after your call, Ellie. Not to say that everything you said was not accurate about the parallel state, the deep state, about the far right and how phony it is. After all, Meloni has continued the policy of the former social democratic Italian government to the letter. And if anything, even more enthusiastically for the globalists, for NATO, for the United States administration. But your comparison between Trump and Milei, the new president of Argentina, was a particularly interesting one and a chilling one. And if Donald Trump gets in and does to the United States what Milei has done to Argentina, my goodness, it's all going to hit the fan, and no one could anticipate or predict what is going to happen next after that. Brilliant call, Ellie. Shows you the intellectual level of this global university of the airwaves. Now, the podcast is going great guns everywhere. In the top 5 in Saudi Arabia, Singapore, and Cyprus. Number 1 in Tanzania. Popular across Africa in general. Even in the charts in Russia. Who knew there were enough of them speaking English there? We're in the podcast charts in Russia, in the top 20. You can download the podcast now by scanning the QR code on the corner of your screen. Let's go to Vaz in Cornwall, in England. Go ahead, Vaz.
Hi, George. It's an honour to speak to you again. It's been a while. I hope you're well. I hope your family is well.
MashaAllah. Very good, sir.
Okay, right. When I spoke to your telephone handlers earlier, I asked them if you, when you become the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, that you would make me a solemn promise based on your lifelong record of being an advocate of peace and an advocate of no wars. You are involved in multiple things. You have always been a supporter of Palestine, etc. And I worship you for doing that. Where I come from or where my parents come from, is an island in the east of the Mediterranean Sea, Cyprus. Cyprus has 3 sovereign British bases, one of which...
Unbelievable.
Yes. One of which currently is being used to support the genocide that is being committed in Israel against the Palestinian people. I hate war, as you do. What I would like to ask you now is to make me personally a solemn promise. When you become the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Great Britain, that you will surrender all 3 bases in Cyprus, Episcopi, Akhretiri, and the Dekelia barracks. 2 of those bases you will surrender to the Democratic Republic of the Cypriot government. And the 3rd base, Dekelia, that you will give to me personally to turn into a sovereign state in the Eastern Mediterranean, a state that will be advocating peace and not supporting war or genocide anywhere in the Middle East. Cyprus.
Well, that's the call of the night, Vaz. I solemnly promise to do the first 2 things, to surrender. Who knew that Britain had sovereign bases in Cyprus after having been driven out of Cyprus by the independence forces and movement well over half a century ago. I'll have to meet you first before I could surrender any Cypriot territory to you, and I'd have to take soundings. But I absolutely take my hat off to your motivation and to the very beautiful things that you said. Vaz in Cornwall via Cyprus. Let's go to line 2. Xavier is in London on the ceasefire. Go ahead, Xavier.
What's going on, George? Thanks for having me on again, bro. Just a quick one I wanted to ask you. So if there was a ceasefire today, for example, what do you think it would look like for the Palestinians? Do you think it would be a win for them due to all of the suffering that they've already been through? And also, what would happen to Gaza after, due to the destruction that Israel has, committed on it? Over 50% is probably destroyed by now. Yeah. So how would the rebuilding go?
Well, it's a good question. It's entirely hypothetical, and as our guests have said, very unlikely to transpire. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it, and doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. If there is a ceasefire, it will be a great victory for the Palestinian masses, who in their steadfastness, their courage, their sacrifice, will have paid an enormous price, and Netanyahu and his gang will not have triumphed. They will have to leave the territory that they invaded with all these thousands of people. They would have to stop the bombs and the guns, the airplanes, the warships, bombarding their victims, their prisoners, and the Gaza Strip would have to be rebuilt, and it would have to be rebuilt at the cost of, I think, hundreds of billions of dollars, which would in part come from Arab countries who have sovereign wealth, who've rebuilt Gaza many times before after horrific bombardment, though nothing like the scale that we've seen this time. The so-called international community might well feel that as they gave the bombs and rockets that destroyed Gaza, they may have some obligation to help rebuild it. There will be mass human interaction with the survivors in Gaza. There will be fundraising and aid such as we have never seen in the world before. I myself will be involved in it as soon as it is possible to try and rebuild the hospitals, the schools, the universities, above all, the houses. 85% of the people of Gaza are now homeless, have no home to return to. My goodness, this will be a construction project such as has never been seen before since the end of the Second World War. And then, of course, attention to the physical and mental wounds that have been sustained by particularly the children whose entire lives were wrecked in front of their eyes and who might have survived while their parents have perished. People who held their dead parents in their arms, dug for them in the rubble. People who saw their siblings slaughtered in front of them. What kind of damage will that have done to these young minds who may never recover from it? But everyone will have to try to do everything that they can if there is a ceasefire. Hoz is in London. Let's hear from him. Hoz, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George. I'm just phoning up to say, first of all, you're literally the only voice of opposition to this man-made famine, the genocide that's taking place. No one has put any kind of resistance up to the Tory government or his king's opposition. Not a single one of these people has done anything for the people of Gaza. They have allowed this government to get away with complete complicity in genocide. So the reason I've phoned you up, George, is to thank you for what you're doing, because you're literally the voice of the people in Gaza. You're literally the only person who has stood up from the first moment that he became a member of parliament, used those famous words of, Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. And what I hate to see today and the last few days is these people who are supposed to be left-wing people like Aaron Bastani and Avara Media and whatever else, trying to create a narrative to try and take you down the way they did with Jeremy Corbyn, because they know that you are the best possible hope of opposition to this uniparty. So I just wanted to applaud you for what you do. I love the fact that you're standing there no matter what every single day, shouting from the rooftop, from the bottom of your heart for the people of Gaza, because you know as well as I do, no one in the uniparty gives a damn about Gaza. All they care about is doing whatever the border
first of all, Hoz, thank you for the very kind things that you said. Secondly, you're right, the same gang that destroyed Jeremy Corbyn are trying and would like to try to destroy me. But as someone said on Twitter, I'm like Corbyn's older, tougher, rougher brother. And despite the fact that he's actually several years older than me, I got what they mean. I'm made of different stuff. Jeremy admitted today in an interview that he was too kind, and that's true. And he'll go to heaven for that reason. But calamity has hardened me and turned my mind to steel. My mind is made of steel, and I will keep on going forward as long as God gives me breath, and I will not be deflected, still less brought down by the Chatterati in their North London dinner parties with their obsessions with race and gender and sexuality and sexual politics and personal pronouns and all the other pish that they spew out in their little dubiously sourced websites and portals. My purpose is the same as it was more than 50 years ago. I have not deviated 1 inch in more than half a century. And with that steel mind, and with the support of people like you, and with the growing ranks of people like Ahmed in the West Midlands, the people that we elected in the council elections on Thursday, the dozens, scores actually, of our members and supporters who were elected as independents and who will increasingly wear our badge and work closely with us. The people from sports, entertainment, academia, and trade unions who are now joining our party. We can't keep up with it, Hoz. We can't keep up with the numbers that are flooding in our direction. The caravan moves on. However, loudly the dogs bark by the side of the road. Thank you kindly for the opportunity to say that. I'm very lucky this evening. I'm in the same town. I'm in the same room as my good wife, the brilliant Gayatri. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Akram Haraki says, why is it impossible to have a radio or TV station in the UK that does not toe the line of the mainstream media, which is heavily influenced by Zionist money and ideology? Wait for it, I have the answer, coming all the way from Montenegro. Dear Mr. Galloway, I hope this letter finds you well amidst the tumultuous times we are facing globally. I want to express my deepest appreciation for your unwavering courage, integrity, and dedication to speaking out against the atrocities being committed against innocent men, women, and children. In the face of unimaginable horror and suffering, you have remained a steadfast voice of reason and compassion. Your willingness to confront the brutality of genocide and the inhumanity of those who perpetrate it is truly inspiring. Your advocacy for justice and accountability in the face of such overwhelming adversity is a beacon of hope for all of us. Your podcast is a breath of fresh air in the media landscape dominated by bias and sensationalism. Very good point. In a world where the truth is often obscured by corporate interests and political agendas, your commitment to honest and transparent journalism is both refreshing and necessary. So I'm confident that your podcast will soon replace biased corporate media and mainstream outlets once and for all. In a world where information is power, your dedication to uncovering the truth and holding those in power accountable is more important than ever. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will be streamed.
That's a brilliant letter, I must say, and most kind. And of course, vitally important. It's vitally important, not just that the revolution is streamed, but the road to the revolution is streamed. And that's what we are currently on, that road. Don't be afraid of the word revolution. We don't mean violence. We hate violence. We eschew it completely. We believe in mass political power, voting, marching, protesting, boycotting, divesting, sanctioning, educating. My role is to agitate, educate, and organize. And that's what we are trying to do in this Global University of the Airwaves, in the Workers' Party of Britain. That's what we are trying to do. But we have to televise it. That's why we need this broadcasting arm that is MOATS, that is Have It Out with Galloway. Correct. And for that, we need people's support. So thank you very much.
It's Hakija. Hakija Luka in Montenegro.
Thank you very much, Hakija, in Montenegro, of all places, one of the world's most beautiful places.
Yeah, beautiful
so thank
coastline.
You. Anything else going down?
Another great monologue tonight. Whatever happens between now and election day, you will definitely have my vote. And it won't be just a protest vote. I genuinely believe in you and your party. This is from Dr. Ray Higginson in Wales.
Wonderful.
We have candidates in Wales, so look out for them.
We do, but not enough, Doctor. If you'd like to join us as a candidate,
good idea.
You'll be most welcome.
Good idea, Doctor, yes. So just one more, because obviously it's a full show, lots of callers. In regards to your poll, does a vote for Israel at the Eurovision Song Festival endorse genocide? Just this one from Mr. Mark Smith. The idea of Israel entering the Eurovision Song Festival is akin to having Ian Brady run in an egg and spoon race at the school sports day.
Incredible.
Now, Ian Brady is, of course, known for the Morse murder. psychopath, child molester and murderer at the high scale together with his girlfriend. So I thought it was very poignant.
Yeah, it is. Israel is the Ian Brady of states. It is the child killer of states. Israel is murdering vastly more children than the monsters, Brady and Hindley. In fact, all the mass murderers, all the serial killers, all combined throughout all history. The Israeli government has murdered more children and their mothers than every killer that you have ever heard of combined. Just think about that. Thank you, Gayatri. See you after the show. Running out of time now. Let's go to California, where Michael is on the line. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, George. Thank you so much for your passion and fury about the horrible things that are going on. And I would like you to know that back in the early 70s, I made a flag for peace during the Vietnam War. And I gave one of my best ones, a yellow one with a black symbol for peace, to a ship that was dry docked in Sausalito, which is in the San Francisco Bay. And they sailed to New Zealand, and from there they were encouraged to lead a brigade to Mororoa near Tahiti to protest the French nuclear bomb test. They sailed there, and they were in the nuclear bomb test zone. And when the French Navy boarded their ship, a general from France who had heard about this flew from France to Australia, and from there he chartered a boat to join the protest. He was on the ship the Free. It was built in Denmark back about 1913. And when the French boarded the ship, General Baudelaire gave to the French commander a medal that he had been given. It was the highest medal awarded to a military person in France. He gave it back to the government in protest of their bomb test in Mororoa, the French nuclear bomb test. We now have a permanent war economy in the United States. And this is what General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, warned about when he said, beware of the military-industrial complex. Today we now have that, and it's exemplified by what we see going on today. Now, 2 weeks ago, thank you for taking my call then and today, you said that you believe that Al-Qaeda did 9/11. Allow me to give you some information that I think will change your mind. On September the 11th, we know what happened in New York. There was a woman who had an apartment house or a condo building across the street from the World Trade Center. Her name was Janet McKinley. When she went back to her apartment, it was filled with the dust that we know filled all of Manhattan. And she saved it. Well, sometime after that, she heard about a Professor Stephen Jones, who was a professor of physics at Brigham Young University, who was investigating what was going on. And she sent the dust to him. And he and Professor Niels Harrit from Denmark looked at the dust under a microscope. And what they found was unignited particles, nanoparticles of red-gray material that was nanothermite and nanothermate, which is what they use in controlled demolitions. Now, that is definitive evidence that controlled demolitions were used in the towers. But what I am suggesting is that we consider the Solomon Brothers building, better known as Building 7, which came down in the afternoon that day, about 5:20. The BBC reported that it came down before it came down, and it was omitted from the final report. if we look at the Solomon Brothers building, I encourage you to talk about this in the House of Commons, because if you say what I just said, it'll send shockwaves throughout the system, and there will be an immediate response, and you will be attacked for saying that. However, what I just told you is true. If you go to the website 9/11
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll definitely look up the McKinley bag of dust. It sounds fascinating. She must have been a compatriot of mine a generation or two back. I haven't heard her name before. There's every reason to believe that there was thermite used to bring down Building 7. Every reason. The more you look at Building 7, the more suspicious it is. And that, of course, circumstantially casts further doubt on the official narrative of what happened to the Twin Towers. All I can say to you is, I saw the Twin Towers being hit by aeroplanes. Nobody's hypnotized me into thinking that I saw that. I know that these buildings were hit by extremely high-powered jet aeroplanes. And so that means, if you are right, that these buildings were brought down by both two aeroplanes and a controlled demolition, which, if nothing else, strikes me as, first of all, a double indemnity of such extraordinary range that you'd have to wonder why they were not doing one or the other. Why didn't they just bring down the buildings with a controlled demolition? Or why didn't they just have the two airplanes smash into the towers? I'm laboring that point because I have heard people say that there were no airplanes, that they were a hologram, meaning that all the people that were on those airplanes are somewhere on a desert atoll and were never flown at all, hijacked and flown at all into the Twin Towers. And I don't believe that. I know what I saw. And I know people who saw with their own eyes, not on a television, not through a camera, who saw the airplanes hitting the towers. So I'm inherently skeptical about why you would need such a belt and braces. Suspenders, I think you call them in the US. Suspenders in Britain are quite a different thing. But let's not get into that this late in the evening. But I promise you, I will look into the points that you have made. Rashid will have to be the last call because I'm already over the time. It's Rashid in California. Go ahead, Rashid.
George, I'm going to share with you one of your favorite quotes, if I'm going to get it right, that there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks when decades happen. Early in the show, you spoke of 5 million in the UK, some opposed to the mistreatment of Palestinians, and some realizing that there must be a red line that cannot be crossed. And there's some similarities in the United States. Here, there are millions of people who are disaffected by the policies of government. They may not be defenders of Palestine, but they are opposed to heavy-handed government. And in their lifetime, they've witnessed billions of their own taxpayer money spent on globalist plans like the Ukraine, COVID, wokeism, Gaza, and over the last decades, the destruction of the middle class. So it's imperative for us, the people who are concerned about Gaza, to build bridges with those disaffected voters. Like, for example, are all the people who voted for Brexit concerned about Palestine? Maybe not, but they might be convinced, and they would be worthy allies. So the forces of the banks and the forces of Zionism have overplayed their hand. They crushed the student protesters last week, just like they crushed the 99% movement over a decade ago. But they stood down when BLM and Antifa destroyed property and burned cities. And they stood down when hired thugs and goons attacked the students at UCLA. Some Americans took notice. Some Americans can smell a rat. And some Americans can see the inequity. And if they cannot, it's our job to educate them. It's our job to take on that difficult task and reach out to those on the margins who could possibly be our brothers in justice. For your audience who are old enough to remember...
Well, I think that's a brilliant call to end on, Rashid. Very eloquently expressed. Exactly the task that lies ahead of us of maximizing the unity of all the forces that reject the overreach, the overweening power of the globalized state, the deep state that lies within, the negation of our democracy, our judiciary, our legal system, the death of justice, the death of equity of any kind, and the overreaching and now I think failing effort by the old empire to stop the rise of the new. The new world powers that are arising did not need to be made enemies of. They did not need to be a part of a self-defined zero-sum game. We could have reacted to the rise of the new world in a spirit of cooperation and willingness to share. As the Chinese leaders say, the world is big enough for all of us. We all could have had a place in the sun, albeit a sun that is rising most starkly and brightly in the east. But our leaders, idiots all, decided instead to set their face against the rise of the new world, to make enemies of it, to damn dissent to their policy within as enemy agents, and to criminalize, to marginalize, potentially to silence, even ultimately worse than that. That's the battle we are now in. Our countries, yours and mine, our rulers, are locked in a losing battle with the rising powers in the world, at the same time as they are locked in a battle with us, with you, with me, with the people watching this, and who watch it every week. It's not that we are Chinese, or want to be, or that we want Britain to be Russia, or America to be Iran. We want the best for our own people and our own country. And I must say, we are led by people who are either fools or knaves. They are either idiots or traitors, because they are selling us, our people, and our legitimate interests down the river, and we have to try and stop them. Look, does a vote for Israel at Eurovision endorse genocide? Well, on Telegram, 91% said yes. 83% said yes on X. 83% said yes on the YouTube community poll. And 90% said yes on the YouTube stream. 41,096 people voted in the poll tonight. The good news is I'll be back again, God willing, on Wednesday with the midweek mother of all talk shows. Who knows where we'll be by then? Will we be back into the maelstrom of genocidal slaughter in Gaza? Or might a breakthrough be just round the corner? we're the people to check out when it happens. Thanks for joining me.